Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen. Capitals have been sieged, nations occupied, and borders redrawn by conquering armies. Yet there exists one nation on Earth that military strategists universally agree is virtually impossible to successfully invade and occupy. That nation is the United States of America, and the reasons why go far beyond its military might or nuclear arsenal. Today, I'm going to explain the 3 geographical and civilian factors that make the United States the most difficult territory on the planet to occupy. Factors that have nothing to do with the Pentagon or aircraft carriers. By the end of this video, you'll understand why even hypothetically, no foreign power could hold American soil for more than a few weeks, even if they somehow managed to land troops here. Let's start with the most obvious but most underestimated defensive barrier, the 2 ocean moats that surround the continental United States. To the east, you have the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 3,000 miles of open water, separating North America from Europe. To the west, the Pacific Ocean stretches nearly 6,000 miles to Asia. These aren't just bodies of water. They are the largest natural defensive barriers any nation has ever possessed in human history. To understand why this matters, you need to think about what an invasion actually requires. You can't just teleport an army into enemy territory. You need to transport millions of tons of equipment, vehicles, ammunition, fuel, food, and personnel across thousands of miles of ocean. You need a massive naval fleet capable of protecting these supply lines from attack. You need air superiority over the entire journey. And you need to do all of this while the most powerful navy in the world, the United States Navy, actively tries to sink everything you send. The logistical challenge is almost incomprehensible. During World War II, the Allied invasion of Normandy required assembling the largest amphibious assault force ever created, just to cross the English Channel, a body of water only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. That operation took years of planning, involved over 5,000 ships, and required complete air and naval superiority. Now imagine trying to do that same operation, but across 3,000 miles of hostile ocean against a defending force with satellites, submarines, aircraft carriers, long-range missiles, and complete awareness of every ship moving toward their coast. It's not just difficult, it's practically impossible with current technology. Even if a hostile nation somehow managed to land troops on American soil, they would face an immediate and catastrophic supply problem. Every bullet, every tank shell, every gallon of fuel, every meal would need to be shipped across thousands of miles of ocean that the United States Navy controls. History shows us what happens when armies lose their supply lines. Napoleon's army in Russia, the German 6th Army at Stalingrad, the Japanese forces in the Pacific. They collapse. An invasion force in America would be fighting on a continent-sized battlefield with supply lines stretching across oceans, while the defending population has unlimited access to domestic resources. It's a military nightmare. But let's say, hypothetically, some future superpower develops the technology to overcome the ocean barrier. Maybe they establish air superiority, neutralize the U.S. Navy, and actually manage to land a large occupying force on American territory. They would then face the second insurmountable obstacle: 400 million firearms in the hands of American civilians. According to the most recent data, there are approximately 500 million civilian-owned firearms in the United States as of 2026. That's more guns than people. In fact, American civilians own roughly 46% of all civilian firearms on the entire planet, despite Americans representing only 4% of the global population. To put that in perspective, the United States has 120.5 firearms per 100 people. The second-place country, Switzerland, has only 27.58. Yemen, a nation literally in a state of civil war, has only 52.8 guns per 100 people. America has more than double that. These aren't just hunting rifles either. The American civilian population owns tens of millions of semi-automatic rifles, millions of handguns, shotguns, and enough ammunition to fight a sustained insurgency for decades. Approximately 32% of American adults personally own a firearm, which translates to roughly 80 to 83 million armed individuals. An additional 10% live in households with firearms, meaning about 42% of all American homes contain at least one gun. Now think about what that means for an occupying army. In Afghanistan, American and coalition forces fought for 20 years against an insurgency that, at its peak, numbered maybe 60,000 active Taliban fighters armed primarily with AK-47s and improvised explosives. That insurgency, operating in a country with a population of 40 million, was enough to make occupation unsustainable, eventually forcing a complete withdrawal. Now imagine trying to occupy the United States, a nation of 330 million people, where 80 million of them are armed, trained, and have access to an infrastructure that includes manufacturing plants, communication networks, and intimate knowledge of local terrain. You wouldn't be facing 60,000 insurgents. You'd be facing tens of millions. Military strategists have a term for this: asymmetric warfare. It's when a smaller, less equipped force uses unconventional tactics to bleed a larger, more powerful occupier until the cost of occupation becomes unbearable. The American Revolutionary War was asymmetric warfare. The Vietnam War was asymmetric warfare. The Soviet-Afghan War was asymmetric warfare. And in every case, the insurgents eventually won, not by defeating the occupying army in pitched battles, but by making occupation so costly and demoralizing that the occupiers eventually gave up and went home. An occupying force in America wouldn't just be fighting the US military. They'd be fighting an armed population larger than the militaries of China, India, and Russia combined. Every town, every neighborhood, every rural county would become a potential battleground. Supply convoys would be ambushed, occupation checkpoints would be attacked, collaborators would be targeted. And because American civilians are so heavily armed and because the country is so geographically vast, there would be no way to disarm the population or secure the territory. Occupying armies need to control key infrastructure, cities, roads, bridges, power plants. But in America, even if you controlled every major city, you'd still have hundreds of millions of acres of rural territory filled with armed civilians who know the land better than any foreign soldier ever could. Which brings us to the third and perhaps most underestimated defensive advantage: the Appalachian Mountains in the east and the Rocky Mountains in the west. If you look at a topographical map of the United States, you'll notice that the country is essentially divided into three major regions: the eastern seaboard, protected by the Appalachian Mountain Range; the western seaboard, protected by the Rocky Mountains and Sierra Nevada; and the Great Plains in the middle. These mountain ranges aren't just scenic backdrops. They are massive, naturally fortified defensive barriers that have shaped American military history for centuries. The Appalachian Mountains stretch over 1,500 miles from Canada to Alabama, covering parts of 13 states. The Rockies stretch over 3,000 miles from Canada to New Mexico. Both ranges contain peaks over 14,000 feet, dense forests, narrow passes, steep valleys, and terrain so rugged that even modern armies struggle to operate effectively there. History has proven time and time again that mountain warfare favors the defender. During the American Civil War, guerrilla fighters in the Appalachian Mountains waged brutal, irregular campaigns that regular armies could not suppress. A Confederate officer during the Civil War famously said, quote, "They cannot catch guerrillas in the mountains any more than a cow can catch fleas," end quote. The terrain provided such an overwhelming advantage to irregular forces that entire regions remained contested for years, despite the presence of large, well-equipped armies. In more recent history, the wars in Afghanistan demonstrated this principle on a global scale. The mountainous terrain of the Hindu Kush allowed Taliban and insurgent forces to resist the most technologically advanced military coalition in human history for 2 decades. Despite air superiority, satellite surveillance, drones, and precision-guided munitions, coalition forces could never fully secure the mountains. The terrain provided too much cover, too many hiding places, and too many opportunities for ambush. Now imagine trying to occupy the Appalachian or Rocky Mountain regions of the United States. But instead of facing an insurgency with outdated rifles, you're facing American civilians armed with modern semi-automatic weapons, night vision, communication equipment, and detailed knowledge of every trail, cave, and ridge in their home territory. The Appalachian region alone covers over 400,000 square kilometers and is home to over 25 million people. Many of these communities have deep cultural traditions of hunting, marksmanship, and self-reliance. In states like Montana, Wyoming, and West Virginia, gun ownership rates exceed 66%, meaning that in these regions, 2 out of every 3 adults own a firearm. These aren't urban populations that might surrender quickly under occupation. These are rural, mountainous communities where people live miles apart, where law enforcement response times are measured in hours, and where self-defense has always been a personal responsibility. An occupying army trying to pacify these regions would face the same nightmare scenario that empires have faced in mountainous terrain for thousands of years. You can't use tanks effectively in steep, forested mountains. You can't establish secure supply lines through narrow passes that can be easily blocked or ambushed. You can't use overwhelming firepower without destroying the very infrastructure you're trying to control. And you can't win hearts and minds when every household sees you as an invader. Military doctrine recognizes that attacking a prepared position in mountainous terrain requires a vastly higher ratio of attackers to defenders than warfare on flat ground. In some historical battles, attackers needed a 10-to-1 numerical advantage just to have a chance of success. But in an American occupation scenario, the defenders wouldn't just be military units. They'd be millions of armed civilians who know every back road, every hidden valley, every cave system in their region. The occupiers would be foreign soldiers in unfamiliar territory, operating thousands of miles from their supply bases, trying to secure a landmass the size of a continent. It's a tactical impossibility, and this doesn't even account for the psychological dimension. American culture, particularly in rural and mountain regions, has a deep-rooted tradition of resistance to tyranny and a historical identity built on rebellion against occupying forces. The American Revolution itself was a guerrilla war against what was, at the time, the most powerful military on Earth. That cultural memory doesn't just fade, it's reinforced through education, media, and national identity. The idea that Americans would simply accept foreign occupation is not just militarily unrealistic, it's culturally incomprehensible. Let me tie all three factors together to paint the complete picture. An occupying force would first have to cross either the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, a logistical challenge that would require naval and air superiority over thousands of miles of hostile water, something no nation on Earth currently possesses the capability to achieve against the United States. If they somehow succeeded, they would then have to secure beachheads and ports while under constant attack from both military forces and armed civilians, a process that would be catastrophically costly in terms of personnel and equipment. Assuming they established a foothold, they would then need to push inland, which means either crossing the Appalachian Mountains in the east or the Rockies in the west, both of which are defended by millions of armed civilians intimately familiar with the terrain. Every mile gained would come at enormous cost. Every supply convoy would be vulnerable. Every occupied town would require constant military presence to prevent insurgent activity. And because the American population is so heavily armed and so geographically dispersed, there would be no way to disarm them or establish effective control. Meanwhile, the occupying forces' supply lines would stretch back across thousands of miles of ocean, making them vulnerable to submarine attacks, airstrikes, and logistical breakdown. Without a steady flow of ammunition, fuel, food, and reinforcements, the occupation would collapse within weeks. This isn't speculation. It's what military strategists call a denial strategy. You don't have to defeat an invader in a decisive battle. You just have to make occupation so costly, so difficult, and so unsustainable that they eventually give up and leave. The combination of oceanic barriers, an armed civilian population, and defensible mountain terrain creates a strategic environment where occupation is functionally impossible. No amount of military technology changes the fundamental reality that you cannot hold territory if you cannot supply your forces, and you cannot supply your forces if you cannot secure your supply lines. And you cannot secure your supply lines across 2 oceans and through hostile mountain ranges defended by millions of armed civilians. This is why military analysts and geopolitical strategists universally agree that, while you might theoretically be able to destroy the United States through nuclear warfare, you could never successfully invade and occupy it. The geographical and civilian realities make it the most defensible large nation in human history. It's not arrogance. It's geography, demographics, and military mathematics. If you found this breakdown interesting, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth analysis on geopolitics, military strategy, and the hidden factors that shape global power. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.